Hi, this is Willie Nelson from NORML. For 30 years, NORML has provided a voice for the millions of Americans who smoke marijuana responsibly. More than 500,000 Americans are arrested each year for smoking pot. These are ordinary citizens like you and me, whose lives and careers are being needlessly destroyed. To learn how you can help, contact NORML at www.norml.org or call toll-free at 888-67-NORML.
And distributed by the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws in Washington, D.C. This is your daily audio stash, the growing truth about cannabis. Welcome to the most popular audio podcast regarding marijuana in all of America and all the world, featuring interviews with scientists, politicians, doctors, prohibition policy activists, regular cannabis consumers, musicians, and NORML staff and NORML's board of directors, along with music and comedy no other podcast can offer. You can always find out more about the show at our website, normalaudiostash.com. We're ending marijuana prohibition with education, one listener at a time. Welcome back to the Audio Stash. Today, it is Wednesday, May 30th. I'm your host, Chris Goldstein. Take a moment to join us at NORML to end marijuana prohibition in America. Just visit NORML.org to get involved today. We've got some music for you here on this summer Wednesday here on the Audio Stash, and also today, our regular Wednesday segment with Dr. Mitch Earlywine, looking at the science of cannabis. We're coming up quick on our 1-year anniversary of the Audio Stash. Over 250 episodes online, over 300 guests. Next week on June the 5th, we'll have a special 1-hour Audio Stash episode for you with highlights of the past year's programs. Let's open up the stash right away with our Cannabis Science segment. Wednesdays here on the Audio Stash, we have the privilege of speaking with Dr. Mitch Earlywine about the science of cannabis. Mitch is professor of psychology at State University of New York and author of the book Understanding Marijuana, A New Look at the Scientific Evidence, as well as editor of the new book Pot Politics. We have links to the books on our website at normalaudiostash.com. Mitch, welcome back to the program today.
Thanks so much, Chris.
Great to speak with you this week. As always, Mitch, it was, of course, Memorial Day on Monday, and the topics I'd like to cover with you here today are very pertinent for our men and women in the armed services. You know, there have been a number of programs and lots of anecdotal evidence to suggest that marijuana and THC can help individuals cope with post-traumatic stress disorder known as PTSD. Now, first, we have to understand PTSD. So, Mitch, tell us what this condition entails.
Well, PTSD is one of the few disorders that requires something actually has to happen outside of you to get the diagnosis. So, usually some relatively rare traumatic event, a hurricane, getting stabbed in some kind of robbery, some kind of violent interaction like that. Of course, all the war-based, rape-based, anything that's going to essentially create an intense stress reaction has the potential to create PTSD. Not everybody who is, in a war, in a hurricane, or in some other kind of acutely stressful incident experiences PTSD, and the range, I've seen estimates from 5% to at least 44% of the people who experience the traumatic event end up with PTSD symptoms. The symptoms start out usually as just a kind of irritable, hyper-aroused, so these folks are on guard a lot, claim to be anxious, and they just can't unwind. Eventually, they start developing flashbacks to the event where they're just suddenly, it's like they're re-experiencing the event again. They report a lot of nightmares, a lot of problems with insomnia, as you can imagine, and then this dissociated sense where they're just sort of lost, not clear who they are or where they are, and that often accompanies that re-experiencing of the traumatic event. You see real exaggerated startle, so when I was at the VA, if I slammed the door, half of the group in the group therapy might jump right out of their seats. I mean, it was that kind of reaction on startle in response to something relatively minor, and then it's comorbid with a lot of anxiety and a great deal of depression.
Now, when it comes to soldiers especially, we do hear about those who make the ultimate sacrifice of their lives, and also to some extent, perhaps not enough, about the tens of thousands who come home with permanent physical injuries. But when it comes to PTSD, we're beginning to understand that this is something serious that affects a broad range of soldiers who serve in conflict environments and then return home. They seem like they would otherwise be okay from that experience of going to war.
It's an intriguing situation because they don't have, an arm that's gone or something like that, and yet they're still very much wounded. I had a client at the VA who had actually been a prisoner of war during World War II, so you can imagine he was markedly older than a lot of the guys at the VA and still had PTSD symptoms related to some torture he experienced as a prisoner of war. And so this was a guy who looked, like any other guy, but really had a very, very difficult life as a reaction to these really stressful events, and could have really benefited from some relatively simple and straightforward therapies, but didn't have the language at the time to talk about it. They had shell shock back then, and it was something that some people had thought was maybe just made up, or that he was faking, or that he just wasn't a tough man. And I'm really grateful that things are improving in our discussions about this disorder. I also found, I was at the VA during Desert Storm, and so everybody was already pretty vigilant anyway, and as things keyed up, in that environment, suddenly everybody at the hospital was much more keyed up and much more aroused and things along those lines. And folks who are at VA hospitals now tell me, since our recent wars have broken out, folks with symptoms from previous engagements, particularly Vietnam vets, are getting a lot of their symptoms flaring up as well.
And because our modern conflicts, rely heavily on the citizen soldiers of the National Guard and Reserve Corps, we've heard some arguments that PTSD might be more prevalent among that set of service members because of the way they serve. These soldiers have such normal lives and are then thrust into the war environments and then retransplanted back to their normal lives.
We're discovering that soldiers who've had some previous experience, even just sort of walking through these kind of traumatic events, tend to do better. I actually have a friend who is in emergency services here in New York State, and they're finding this kind of stress inoculation training approach where people sort of walk through some pretty gruesome drills that would help you at least prep a little bit for this kind of thing tend to do better. But folks who've, basically been, having a normal life and then suddenly end up experiencing something really traumatic like a shelling or a bombing or things like that, they just don't have the same resources, don't know how to frame it in the same way. We're having some good luck with natural disaster and having emergency workers get there right away and debrief folks right away, give them the chance to talk about it, to experience a lot of these negative emotions, and really just spend some time weeping and getting it normalized. But without that kind of experience, we see the higher and higher rates of post-traumatic stress disorder and some of the higher estimates of response to the stressors seems to show up in those folks with less training.
And Mitch, how is this normally treated? When someone is obviously suffering from PTSD, how are they treated by mental health professionals and their doctors?
We've got some really good luck with exposure-based treatments, which it sounds counterintuitive, but in fact, sitting down and walking through exactly what happened, Some folks write about what happened and then have to reread that essay over and over again. They learn relaxation techniques and then listen to tapes of themselves describing what happened. And the initial sessions are really aversive, really arousing, filled with, weeping and anxiety and stuff like that. But as you can imagine, by week 12 or so, walking through it, it takes away some of the fear, some of the anxiety, and some of that arousal. And it's like, those old Chinese proverbs about, go to the heart of fear to defeat it. It really does seem to work, but it's best in a setting with a therapist where you've had the relaxation training first and where you really let it run its course. What happens, unfortunately, is a lot of folks try to do it on their own, and they sit down and do it for about 10 minutes. They find it too aversive, and they quit, and then they never really get to get the benefit of the exposure-based treatments that way.
Last year, I interviewed author Penny Coleman on her book Flashback, Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder, Suicide, and the Lessons of War. Penny had experienced this scenario with her husband, who served in Vietnam. And, Mitch, suicide seems to be the unfortunate outcome of serious cases of PTSD in soldiers. So, why would suicide be a concern here? And are those severe cases treated with antipsychotic drugs and the like?
As it turns out, the comorbid depression is so high, so the rates of depression in folks with PTSD is so high that may be part of the issue. Particularly among the Vietnam vets I knew, there was this tendency towards survivor guilt where, you'd hear a shell explode, two people would stand up, one in front of the other, and the one in front would get killed, and then the one who was standing behind couldn't help but say, why that person and not me? That's a pretty rough thing to have to, bounce around in your mind for years and years. What I do see with the suicidality as well is not so much flagrant, I'm going to take a knife and slit my throat, but an incredible rate of deaths in accidents right after Vietnam and among that Vietnam vet group, a great deal of spinal cord injury among those folks, and so it's sort of suicide without necessarily committing suicide, if you will. I'm really distressed by that, and it's a tough topic to talk about. But yeah, it's definitely one of those prices that we pay that never really shows up in the estimates of how difficult trauma is on our armed forces.
And Mitch, what about marijuana and THC helping with post-traumatic stress disorder? I mean, we've seen strong data that marijuana can help with depression, and in Israel, Professor McCollum, who actually identified THC in the 1960s, ran test programs in 1998 and again in 2004 to have the Israeli government actually supply marijuana to soldiers specifically to treat PTSD. So, how might marijuana help here?
It's an interesting thing because there's two schools of thought, both really, really effusive about how they are about it. There's a subset of exposure-based therapists who say, marijuana is just going to interfere, it's going to mess up my exposure treatments, and I do think that at least during the exposure sessions, marijuana can be a real problem. You can't go in there high and talk about these events and expect to get some of the benefits that you would get from normal exposure therapy. However, we see that all these symptoms are symptoms we've had good luck with in cannabis-based medicine before. So the insomnia, the anxiety, the depression, all of those seem to benefit quite well from THC and other cannabinoids. So it's clearly something we want to have in the armament to making daily life in between exposure sessions as tolerable as possible. Dr. McCollum's data haven't appeared yet, but the intuitively appealing part was that we activate the cannabinoid system perhaps in an effort to take some of the stress away, and then people would be more likely to have these discussions and be more willing to engage in some of these exposure-based treatments. THC isn't the only substance that's been proposed for this. Rick Doblin's group has some approval to use MDMA in a comparable sort of therapy, and at least the initial data look very promising for that.
Mitch, I've heard from many soldiers who've served in the past and the present. On my public radio program, the group Veterans for Peace were frequent studio guests, and more than a few of them would tell me off the air that during Vietnam, they themselves and many of the soldiers around them smoked marijuana on a daily basis while they were in their tour of duty. So I have to ask, is there any data here to show that marijuana intoxication can help someone deal with the stresses they would experience in the moment?
We've had data for at least the last decade suggesting that, vets at the West Haven VA said cannabis helped them with those hyperarousal symptoms and some of the, ironically, some of the paranoia and fear associated with when you're around triggers, when you're around war memorabilia or things like that. But it's just the self-reports of those individuals, so we don't really know. But if anybody would know, certainly they would. My disappointment about that, though, is that it seems to keep people from going in for the exposure-based treatments that we have really compelling data that, 3 months of hard work on those, and you no longer have to rely on cannabis to keep these symptoms at bay. And then, God forbid you might be able to enjoy cannabis recreationally or not use it at all as you see fit. In the moment, yes, cannabis does seem to decrease anxiety in a subset of folks. But again, we have to remember that there's also a subset of folks who have adverse reactions and who find it really aversive and get frightened and paranoid and scared. But those aren't often the folks who end up in our research because they don't use it enough times to really develop any kind of familiarity with the plant.
Now, would there be a place for this being a regular treatment for soldiers and PTSD? And let me also ask if soldiers who live in places like California, where there's a big military population, could get a medical marijuana recommendation solely for PTSD.
I know of at least 2 folks in mental health in California who are willing to write recommendations for that kind of prescription, in part because they want to assess for the individual symptoms that we know cannabis is good for, like hyperarousal and the insomnia problems. I would love the idea of, a PTSD treatment system that, permits cannabis use and then encourages folks to hook up with therapists who can help with these exposure-based treatments. And I think that combination might actually bring in some of the folks who are so far unwilling to participate in these kinds of therapies and then, could really have a big impact on, the 5 to 10% of the population who experience these kinds of symptoms. And particularly given the high rates of trauma we're probably going to experience with a new wave of vets, this would be a great way to get them into treatment early on and to prevent this from becoming a really expensive and difficult problem for us later on.
Now, soldiers in the modern American military do have counseling services available to them, even in theater. But we've also seen media reports that the culture of the military does not look very kindly on those individuals who seek out that mental health support, even though it's available. Now, we know that PTSD in soldiers is a common issue, and though politicians talk about mental health care being paramount, it seems there's little real or long-lasting support for this population of soldiers who would be at the most risk for PTSD. Now, is there perhaps something that we non-soldiers of society must change in our attitude and expectations of the life and duty of a soldier? We have millions of troops deployed, so PTSD could be a very big problem here in the near future.
I think that is the case, and I've actually been delighted with how this has been handled in some of the arts. So now suddenly we're having films about post-traumatic stress disorder and have since the Vietnam era, and a number of, folks who project interviews up on billboards and things like that. I mean, this is becoming something where the arts are kind of leading the way to say, we don't have to all be John Wayne, and not everybody who goes into battle necessarily can come back and be injured, but without having an actual physical injury. And we want to make sure that this conversation improves and increases. And I think it's definitely better than it was in the 1970s, but we do have a long way to go. And I think inoculation, in fact, for this kind of thing would have to occur during basic training. And our stereotypes of basic training are, it's boot camp and you're supposed to toughen everybody up. But if in fact there were even just a few hours spent on stress inoculation and the opportunity to talk about these things once they happen and after they happen as a preventive measure, because this is going to save the Veterans Administration literally millions of dollars if folks knew ahead of time that it's okay to do these debriefing sessions right away, that it's okay to have psychological care, on site, and then down the line we won't end up with folks showing up at the VA unemployed, disappointed, strung out on drugs that aren't helpful, and basically costing us a great deal of money when they had been such wonderful, productive, helpful people and would love to be that way again.
And Mitch, for soldiers and their families who might be listening today and who may be concerned about post-traumatic stress disorder, what are some good places to seek out therapy and some solutions for PTSD?
I would like to plug a way to find therapists, and that's at AABT.org. It's the Association for the Advancement of Behavior Therapy, and they've changed their name, but the website is still AABT.org, and down the left-hand side you can click on Find a Therapist, and there's someone in literally every state of the union who's really good at these kind of treatments and would love to make sure that folks get hooked up with that kind of opportunity.
Well, Mitch, this has been a very informative and poignant discussion here today. I really appreciate you letting me ask all these questions of you each week here.
Super.
Thank you again, Mitch. Dr. Mitch Earlywan is professor of psychology at State University of New York. He's author of the book Understanding Marijuana, A New Look at the Scientific Evidence, and editor of the new book Pot Politics. We have links to the books on our website at normalaudiostash.com. Let's get into some great Wednesday music and comedy right here on NORML's Daily Audio Stash today. First, let's start with some music from podshow.com. Here's one from a group called the Den Collective. We have links to these guys up on our website at normalaudiostash.com.
Super tight, purple haze and northern lights, White Widow, super skunk and Afghan special, turban poison, Maui Wowie and Big Butt, California, squidgy black and mixed sativa, Mary Jane, I smoked my last one. Someone roll another joint. Orange four-way, Holland's Hope and Hindu Kush, Shiva Shanti, Mr. Nice and Juicy Fruit, Smoky Bear, Power Plant and Pink 19, Special K, Black Dominia and Blue Velvet, Mary Jane, smoked my last one. Someone roll another joint. Mary Jane, smoked my last one. Someone roll another joint.
That was the Den Collective with that tune there. We have links to them up at normalaudiostash.com. We found that track up at podshow.com. And it's a holiday week, well, an American holiday week, so we've got this, the American Holiday Song from a group called Belt. We have links to these guys as well up on our website today.
There's something in the air this morning, some smog and a terror warning, barbecues and traffic jams and Uncle Sam and Uncle Sam. And I'm still going to work today. It's just another American holiday. I'm gonna call everyone I know. Things I'm chewing my spirits low. Go outside and drink beer on the lawn with my flip-flops on, with my flip-flops on. And we're expecting attacks today. It's just another American holiday. And I'm getting wasted early, so you should come on down. And we can have a good time messing around with those fireworks I smuggled, baby, oh yeah. And when it's over, what will we have? A photograph of mom and dad holding flags and putting up their middle finger. And all those wonderful drinking games we play. It's just another American holiday. And I'm getting wasted early, so you should come on down. And we can have a good time messing around with those fireworks I smuggled, baby, oh yeah. It's just another American holiday. It's just another American holiday. It's just another American holiday. It's just another American holiday.
That was the American Holiday Song from Belt. We've got links to them up at normalaudiostash.com. We found that track at podshow.com. Now we're going to round out our show here today with some great classic comedy. Well, classic marijuana comedy, that is. This is from the Pot's Greatest Hits album. You can buy it up at potsgreatesthits.com. We have links to that on our website as well today. Doug Benson is the host of this CD, and here's a nice little track about growing the chronic.
This is Paul Gilmartin.
Thank you. I have some true pot stories to tell you guys. Does anybody remember how hard it was to get weed in like the late 80s? Because it was, I don't know if it was the Just Say No thing, but my girlfriend and I at the time could not, now my wife, couldn't for the life of us find weed. And, being a comedian, having a lot of free time, the idea hit me, well, fuck, why don't I grow weed? And like the average person that grows weed, you go, I'll get a black light, and I'll put some seeds in a cup, and it fucking blows. So I went to a little counterculture bookstore and bought the Marijuana Grower's Handbook and read it, cover to cover. And decided, well, fuck, I got some free time. I'm going to do this right. And we got a little apartment in Chicago. And everybody that lived in the building got stoned. So I didn't have to worry, if it stunk. So I bought a 1,000-watt metal halide light and put it in our spare room. Lined the walls with foil. And this shit just started taking off. But it wasn't quite there. It was, the buds were decent sized. They were maybe like that big, and I was like, something's wrong. So I read the book again, and it said that whatever the weakest link is in the chain will determine how strong your weed is. And there are three things: nutrients in the soil, sunlight, and the shit that it breathes, which is CO2. And I went, CO2? Okay. How do I get some CO2? So I found this place that would sell you a CO2 tank on a fucking timer. Then I had the light on a timer to mimic the change of the season, so it would think that fall was coming. And I swear to God, the night that I plugged the CO2 tank in, and put this shot in a timer. It's like I went in the next morning and this little tiny plant that had these little it was like elephant cocks hanging off this. I was like, oh my fucking God! That's the shit from the High Times centerfold! Holy fuck! I was bringing my friends over. They were like, oh my God! Look at that fucking shit! This shit was so... I'm not kidding you. The buds were like this fucking big. I'd crack them off and I'd dry them. And the THC on them, you know, that's the shit, obviously, that gets you high. It's like a little stalk with a bubble. And if you look at it real close, what disintegrates when it's in the woods or the whatever is animals brush against it or the wind blows and that little bubble pops. But when you're growing in a controlled environment, you've got the fan perfect. Just enough to strengthen the stalk, but not enough to burst the bubble. So when you harvest this shit, it's like a fucking booger on you. You can't get rid of it. It's like, fuck, you take the bud from me. Shit, now it's the one hit of this shit and you are on another fucking planet. I had people like lined at my door. I never sold it. I would just give people like quarter ounces. They thought I had come from heaven. It was... I at one point I had a pound in my refrigerator and I couldn't even keep up with it. People were like, hey dude, can I have an ounce? I was like, yeah, fuck, whatever. Baked out of my mind. And one day I must have had, because all it would take literally 2 hits and you would almost shit your pants. It was that strong. And one morning, I don't know if it was just because I was pissed because I hadn't got through like the 8th level of Mario Brothers, but I was like, fuck this, I'm gonna do like 4 hits right in a row. And I was so fucked up. The only thing I knew that would save me is Devil's Food cookies. And we had no Devil's Food cookies. So the thought occurred to me, you could go to the grocery store, but then you would have to venture into the world of the unstoned. Which is fucking frightening when you're really baked. So I'm wondering, like, Devil's Food cookies, the unstoned, what the fuck do I do? It's a tough call. I really want something chocolatey and chewy. So I'm like, fuck it, I'm a tough man. I can get out there and fucking look at people with my red eyes and my fucking glazed stupid face. So I'm walking out to the car, and I swear to God, this is like my thought process. All right. I'm going to the grocery store. I should probably make a list. But then I'd have to go back in and get paper. Paper? How do you make paper? I wonder what it's like working in a paper mill. I wonder if the guys from the paper mill ever play the guys from the pencil mill in softball. They'd always have something to keep score. I see my neighbor, we wave. They think I'm deep in some important thought. I get into my car. I remind you, this is a true fucking story. I get into my car. I pull out the keys. And I can't find the steering wheel. After 10 seconds, it occurs to me, I'm in the back seat. My neighbor's looking at me like, what the fuck are you doing? So now I got to pretend like I'm looking for something. Because when a lot of people look for something in a car, they don't just poke their head in and look around. They sit upright and think about it. Where might be that map that I misplaced?
That was Growing the Chronic from the Pot's Greatest Hits CD. That's a benefit for NORML, produced by Lee Allen. You can get copies of the CD up at potsgreatesthits.com. Of course, we have links to it on our website today at normalaudiostash.com. Listening to NORML's Daily Audio Stash, the growing truth about cannabis. Make sure you visit our website at normalaudiostash.com. That's NORML AUDIOSTASH.com for more information about every day's show. I'm your host, Chris Goldstein. Thanks for listening today. See you at 4:20 tomorrow.